What if the real reason you feel stuck in English and in your marriage isn't your vocabulary, your accent, or even America's fast culture, but the simple truth my mom once told me: you don't listen to me? In this video, I'll share how moving to the United States, struggling with love, family, and confidence, and nearly giving up on learning English changed the way I hear, not just words, but people. You don't listen to me. You don't listen to me. That was the sentence my mom said to me on a cold evening in the United States, when I was already tired, already defensive, already convinced that the world was too loud for me to survive in English. And maybe you know that feeling. You sit in a room full of fast American voices, and you nod, you smile, you say yeah at the right time, but inside you are translating, guessing, surviving. You tell yourself you are listening. But are you really hearing? When I first moved to the United States, I thought my biggest problem would be grammar. I worried about verb tenses. I worried about pronunciation. I practiced words like comfortable and vegetable as if they were final exams. But the real problem was not language. It was attention. It was ego. It was fear. My mom came to visit us during our second year in America. By then, I was married, adjusting to American culture, and trying to build a life that looked stable on the outside. Inside, I felt small. The climate was different. The air felt dry in winter. The supermarkets were huge. People smiled at strangers. My husband spoke English naturally, confidently. I spoke carefully, like I was walking on ice. One night, after dinner, my husband tried to tell me about his stressful day at work. He spoke quickly. I caught maybe 70%. My brain filled in the rest. Instead of asking him to repeat, I reacted to what I thought he said. He stopped. He looked at me and said, gently, "That's not what I meant." I felt embarrassed. So I defended myself. I spoke louder. I said, "I know what you said." But I didn't. Not fully. My mom was sitting at the table, quiet. She watched us like someone watching a movie she had already seen. Later, when we were alone, she said softly, "You don't listen to him. You listen to your fear." At first, I was angry. I wanted to say, "You don't understand. English is not my first language. Life here is hard." But something inside me paused. Because deep down, I knew she was not talking about vocabulary. She was talking about presence. Let me tell you something important if you are learning English in the United States in 2026. Watching YouTube videos like this for listening practice, speaking practice, real English story practice. Your brain does something very interesting when it feels unsafe. Neuroscience shows that when we are anxious, the amygdala, the emotional alarm system in your brain, becomes more active. When that happens, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logical thinking and deep listening, becomes less efficient. In simple words, when you are afraid of making mistakes, you literally hear less. That was me. When my husband spoke, I wasn't just listening to his words. I was listening to my own insecurity. I was asking myself, did I miss something? Did I misunderstand? Will he think I'm not smart? So instead of being curious, I was defensive. Instead of saying, "Can you repeat that slowly?" I pretended to understand. Maybe you do this too. You nod. You smile. You say, okay. But later, you realize you didn't really understand the conversation. And then you feel tired. Because pretending is exhausting. That night, my mom told me a short story from my childhood. She said, when you were little, you would interrupt people because you were excited. You wanted to respond before they finished speaking. Now you do the same thing. But instead of excitement, it is fear. Her words hit me harder than any English exam ever could. Listening is not just a language skill. It is a relationship skill. It is a marriage skill. It is a family skill. In America, where communication is direct and fast, listening becomes even more important. If you miss emotional meaning, not just vocabulary, small misunderstandings grow into big arguments. So I started observing myself. The next day, when my husband spoke, I tried something different. I took a slow breath. I looked at his face. I focused on his tone, not just his words. When I didn't understand, I said, slowly, can you say that again? I want to understand. Do you know what happened? He smiled. Not because my English was perfect, but because I was present. Psychologists often say that active listening increases relationship satisfaction. Studies in communication research show that when partners feel heard, conflict decreases and emotional safety increases. You don't need advanced vocabulary to create safety. You need attention. For English learners in the United States, this is powerful. Instead of asking, how can I speak perfectly, try asking, how can I listen better? Listening gives you more input. More input improves speaking naturally. It's a simple principle of language acquisition. The more meaningful input you receive, the stronger your output becomes. My mom was right. I didn't listen. Not to my husband. Not to myself. Not even to the language around me. And maybe that's where your motivation is hiding too. Not in another grammar book. Not in another complicated method. But in slowing down and truly hearing the world around you. That cold evening in America, I thought my mom was criticizing me. Now I understand she was giving me a key. A key to better English. A better marriage. A calmer mind. Because sometimes, the sentence that hurts the most is the one that saves you. The days I wanted to quit. Have you ever opened your mouth to speak English and felt your mind go completely blank, like someone turned off the lights inside your head? That was me during my second year in the United States, sitting in my car outside a grocery store, practicing one simple sentence before walking in. Hi, how are you? It sounds easy. It is easy. But when you are tired, lonely, and afraid of sounding foolish, even easy sentences feel heavy. After my mom told me, you don't listen to him, something inside me started to crack. Not in a dramatic movie way. In a quiet way. The kind where you realize the problem is not outside, it is inside. And that realization is uncomfortable. At that time, my daily routine looked normal. I woke up early. I made breakfast. I cleaned the kitchen. I tried to watch English listening practice videos on YouTube. I repeated sentences slowly. I would like to, could you please, I understand what you mean. I told myself I was improving. But emotionally, I was shrinking. Living in America in 2026 means everything moves fast. People schedule coffee 2 weeks in advance. Customer service representatives speak clearly but quickly. At school meetings, parents ask confident questions. I sat there translating in real time, always a few seconds behind. That small delay made me feel invisible. One afternoon, after a parent-teacher meeting for my child, I walked to the parking lot and cried. Not because anyone was rude. They were kind. But kindness does not remove insecurity. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Why didn't I say that? Why didn't I ask more questions? Why do I always freeze? If you are learning English as a second language, especially in the United States, you might know this mental replay very well. It is like your brain becomes a courtroom. You are the judge. You are the criminal. And you are always guilty. There is a psychological reason for this. When we operate in a non-native language, our cognitive load increases. Cognitive load simply means how much mental effort your brain is using. Research in bilingual processing shows that using a second language requires more working memory, especially in stressful situations. When your working memory is overloaded, confidence drops. You hesitate more. You doubt more. You speak less. That was exactly my pattern. The less confident I felt, the less I spoke. The less I spoke, the less I practiced. The less I practiced, the more I believed I was bad at English. It was a perfect negative cycle. And then something dangerous started happening. I began to avoid situations that required conversation. I chose self-checkout machines instead of talking to cashiers. I let my husband make phone calls. I answered messages with short texts instead of voice notes. On the surface, I told myself, I'm just tired. But the truth was deeper. I was losing motivation. Motivation does not disappear in one big explosion. It fades quietly. First, you skip one listening practice session. Then 2. Then you tell yourself you will start again next week. You watch other English learners online who seem confident and fluent, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel smaller. One night, I told my husband, maybe I'm just not good at languages. The sentence tasted bitter. I used to believe I was strong. Moving to America was supposed to be brave. Now I felt like I was failing at something basic. He looked at me carefully and said, "You're not bad at English. You're scared of being seen struggling." That sentence hurt in a different way. Because it was true. When you are learning English in a country where everyone else seems fluent, you don't just fear mistakes. You fear judgment. Even if people are not judging you, your brain assumes they are. Social psychology explains this as the spotlight effect. We overestimate how much others notice our mistakes. In reality, most people are too busy thinking about themselves. But knowing that logically does not automatically change how you feel emotionally. During those weeks, I seriously considered giving up serious improvement. I thought, my English is good enough for daily life. Why push myself? I wanted comfort, not growth. I wanted silence, not practice. And this is where many people stop. They reach a functional level of English and stay there. Not because they cannot improve, but because improvement requires discomfort. It requires asking, "Can you repeat that?" It requires saying, "I don't understand." It requires listening carefully instead of protecting your ego. I remembered my mom's words again, "You listen to your fear." She was right. When my husband spoke, I wasn't fully present. But when life spoke, through challenges, through embarrassment, through small failures, I wasn't listening either. I only heard my inner critic. So one morning, instead of opening another complicated grammar lesson, I did something simple. I chose one short story, my own story, and I told it out loud in English. Slowly. Imperfectly. I described my first winter in America. I described the silence in the supermarket. I described the parent-teacher meeting that made me cry. It felt strange. But it also felt honest. I realized that maybe motivation does not come from being perfect. Maybe it comes from being real. The days I wanted to quit were not signs that I was weak. They were signs that I was stretching. And stretching is uncomfortable. Muscles shake when they grow. So does confidence. If you are watching this for English listening practice, speaking practice, or real English story practice, and you feel tired or behind, I want you to hear this clearly. Feeling stuck does not mean you are failing. It might mean you are right at the edge of growth. And sometimes, the moment you want to quit is exactly the moment you need to start listening, not to fear, but to possibility. Culture shock in America. The first winter I experienced in the United States did not just change the temperature around me. It changed the temperature inside me. Have you ever stepped outside and felt the air hurt your face? That was my introduction to American winter. The sky looked beautiful, clean, almost cinematic. But the wind felt personal. Before moving to America, I imagined culture shock would be dramatic. I thought maybe people would be rude, or I would face obvious discrimination. Instead, what I experienced was more subtle. It was the shock of small differences. The way neighbors waved but rarely visited. The way people said, "Let's get coffee sometime," without meaning tomorrow. The way "How are you?" did not always require a real answer. In my country, conversations were layered and emotional. In the United States, communication felt efficient. Clear. Direct. At first, I admired that. Then I realized I did not always understand it. For example, during a neighborhood gathering, someone said to me, "We should have you over sometime." I smiled and replied, "Yes, tell me when." They smiled back. Weeks passed. No invitation. I felt confused. Did I say something wrong? Did they change their mind? Later, my husband explained gently, "Sometimes it's just a polite phrase." That was my first lesson in American small talk. Language is not only vocabulary. It is culture. It is context. It is invisible rules. When you are learning English in the United States, you are not just learning grammar. You are learning how Americans soften criticism, how they decline invitations indirectly, how they express boundaries without sounding harsh. And when you miss those signals, you feel lost. The climate added another layer to my adjustment. Winter meant shorter days. Less sunlight. Research shows that reduced sunlight can influence mood through changes in serotonin levels. I did not know the science at that time. I only knew I felt more tired, more sensitive, more easily overwhelmed. Seasonal changes affected my motivation to practice English. On gray days, even listening practice felt heavy. One afternoon, I stood in a large American supermarket, staring at 30 different types of cereal. Back home, there were maybe 5. Choice is a symbol of freedom in America. But too much choice can create decision fatigue. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When your brain must process too many options, it becomes exhausted. That day, I wasn't just choosing cereal. I was choosing identity. Was I becoming American? Was I losing something from my past? Even my accent felt like a decision. At home, my husband adapted quickly. He understood jokes on television. He followed fast conversations at work. I watched from the side, catching pieces. Sometimes I laughed 1 second too late. Sometimes I did not laugh at all. And here is the honest part, I started resenting that gap. Not because he did anything wrong, but because his fluency highlighted my insecurity. In marriage, small emotional distances can grow quietly. When you feel culturally behind, you may interpret neutral comments as criticism. When he said, "You misunderstood," I heard, "You're not good enough." Culture shock is not only about food and weather. It is about identity. It is about losing the automatic confidence you had in your home country. In your native language, you are witty. You are expressive. You are intelligent. In a second language, you feel reduced. Sociolinguists explain that language carries social power. When you speak the dominant language fluently, you feel agency. When you struggle, you may feel dependent. That dependency can create tension in relationships, especially in marriage. One evening, during a small disagreement, my husband said, "That's not what I meant." Again. The same sentence from before. And again, I felt defensive. But this time, I paused. I remembered my mom's words, "You don't listen to him." So I tried something different. Instead of responding immediately, I asked, slowly, "What did you mean?" It was a simple question. But it required humility. He explained calmly. I realized I had misunderstood not because my English was terrible, but because I filled in emotional blanks with fear. Culture shock had made me hyper-alert. My brain was scanning for rejection, not meaning. Neuroscience tells us that when we enter a new environment, our brain increases vigilance. This is a survival mechanism. But long-term vigilance is exhausting. It makes you interpret neutral situations as threats. In language learning, this means you may hear criticism where there is none. The more I learned about American culture, not just language, the more relaxed I became. I observed how coworkers disagreed politely. I noticed how parents encouraged independence in children. I listened to podcasts about communication styles in the United States. Gradually, patterns became familiar. And familiarity reduces fear. If you are learning English in America right now, and you feel like you don't fully belong, let me tell you something important. Culture shock does not mean you made the wrong decision. It means you are expanding. Your brain is building new connections. Your identity is stretching. That discomfort is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of growth. Looking back, I see that the climate, the supermarket, the polite phrases, the fast conversations, all of it was training. Training not just for better English listening and speaking skills, but for emotional resilience. Because once you realize that misunderstanding is part of adaptation, you stop taking every awkward moment personally. And when you stop taking everything personally, you can finally start truly listening, not only to words, but to the culture behind them. When love started to crack. No one tells you that sometimes love doesn't break because of betrayal or drama. Sometimes it cracks because of small misunderstandings repeated quietly over time. Like water dripping on stone. Slow. Patient. Invisible, until one day you see the damage. In our third year living in the United States, my husband and I were not fighting loudly. We were functioning. Paying bills. Driving our child to school. Grocery shopping. Smiling in photos. From the outside, we looked like a stable immigrant family building the American dream. Inside, something felt fragile. It often started with simple conversations at the end of the day. He would come home from work, tired but wanting to talk. I would already be mentally exhausted from navigating English all day, school emails, short conversations, small talk with neighbors, YouTube English listening practice sessions that left my brain full. He would say, "Can I tell you something about today?" And I would think, I hope I understand everything. That thought alone changed my energy. Instead of curiosity, I felt pressure. Instead of connection, I felt performance. He spoke naturally, quickly, using idioms I had heard but not fully absorbed. It threw me under the bus. The meeting went sideways. I had to push back. I understood the general idea, but not the emotional tone behind every phrase. So I reacted to the surface meaning. Once, he described a disagreement with a colleague. I thought he was angry and about to quit his job. I immediately started giving advice. Maybe you should look for another company. He stopped and said, confused, "I'm not that upset. I was just telling you what happened." There it was again. The gap. From a communication psychology perspective, this is called mismatched emotional attunement. When one partner shares an experience, they are not always asking for solutions. Often, they want empathy. When you respond with advice instead of understanding, they may feel unheard. But here is the painful truth. I wasn't trying to ignore him. I was trying to protect myself from misunderstanding. My brain, already overloaded from functioning in a second language, wanted certainty. If I misunderstood something small, it felt like failure. So I rushed to conclusions. Fast conclusions feel safer than slow listening. And he started noticing. One evening, after a minor disagreement, he said quietly, "Sometimes I feel like you're not really with me when I talk." That sentence echoed my mom's words. "You don't listen to me." I felt defensive again. "I am listening," I insisted. "It's just hard sometimes." Both were true. I was physically present. But emotionally, I was half inside my own head, checking grammar, predicting meaning, worrying about mistakes. Research in bilingual relationships shows that couples who operate in a non-native language may experience more frequent misunderstandings, especially around humor, sarcasm, and emotional nuance. Tone carries meaning. Cultural background shapes interpretation. Without shared context, even loving words can land awkwardly. At the same time, American culture values direct expression. If something is wrong, people are encouraged to say it. In my culture, we often soften discomfort. We implied rather than stated. So when my husband spoke directly, I sometimes perceived it as harsh even when it wasn't. Small cultural differences layered on top of language insecurity created tension. I started noticing another pattern. When I felt insecure about my English, I withdrew emotionally. Not dramatically. Just slightly. I spoke less. I changed the subject. I escaped into my phone. It was easier to scroll than to risk misunderstanding. But distance in marriage is rarely solved by silence. One night, after we put our child to bed, we sat in the living room in silence. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. He turned it off and said, "I miss how we used to talk." That hurt more than any argument. Because I missed it too. Before moving to the United States, we used to talk for hours. In our native language, I was expressive, funny, confident. In English, I felt edited. Smaller. Careful. And when you shrink yourself long enough, your relationship feels the difference. Psychologically, relationships thrive on emotional responsiveness, the ability to respond to your partner's emotional bids. A bid can be a question, a story, a complaint, a joke. When bids are ignored or misinterpreted repeatedly, connection weakens. It doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes. I realized I had been missing bids. Not intentionally, but consistently. So I decided to experiment, not with perfect English, but with intentional listening. The next time he started telling a story, I did something simple. I put my phone away. I turned my body toward him. I maintained eye contact. When I didn't understand a phrase, I said, calmly, "What does that mean?" without apologizing 10 times. Something shifted. He slowed down naturally. He explained with patience. We laughed at my literal interpretations of idioms. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I allowed myself to be curious. Curiosity replaced defensiveness. That was the beginning of repair. Love did not crack because we lacked feelings. It cracked because we lacked presence. Because I was so focused on surviving English that I forgot to experience it. If you are learning English in the United States and you are in a relationship, understand this. Your language journey affects your emotional world. Fatigue from listening practice, anxiety about speaking, fear of mistakes, all of it can quietly enter your marriage. But it can also strengthen it. When you say, "I want to understand you better," you are not just practicing English speaking skills. You are practicing intimacy. The cracks in our love were not permanent damage. They were signals. Signals that I needed to stop performing and start listening. And sometimes, the most romantic sentence in any language is not "I love you." It is, "Tell me again." I'm listening. What my mom really saw. It's strange how the people who raised you can see patterns in your behavior before you see them yourself. My mom had only been in the United States for a short visit, yet she understood something about my marriage and my English learning journey that I had been avoiding for months. One quiet afternoon, while my husband was at work and my child was at school, we sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea. Sunlight came through the window, soft but cold, like American winter always is. She looked at me and asked, "Are you happy here?" It was such a simple question. But simple questions are dangerous. They leave no place to hide. "I'm fine," I answered automatically. She didn't react. She just waited. Silence is uncomfortable when you're not used to it. In American culture, silence in conversation can feel awkward. In my culture, silence can be meaningful. My mom used silence like a mirror. Eventually, I spoke again. "I'm trying," I said. She nodded slowly. Then she said the sentence that stayed with me, "You are trying so hard to speak that you forgot how to listen." At first, I thought she was repeating the same criticism. But this time, her tone was softer. Curious, not judgmental. "What do you mean?" I asked. She leaned back and told me something I had forgotten about myself. When I was young, I loved telling stories. I would speak quickly, excited, sometimes interrupting others because I didn't want to lose my idea. She said, "You always had a strong voice. But you never liked feeling wrong." That part hurt. Because moving to the United States forced me to feel wrong almost every day. Wrong grammar. Wrong pronunciation. Wrong cultural reference. My instinct was to protect myself. And protection often looks like control. From a psychological perspective, this makes sense. When people feel uncertain, they try to regain control in small ways. Interrupting. Finishing sentences for others. Jumping to conclusions. These behaviors create a temporary illusion of certainty. But certainty is not the same as connection. My mom continued, "When your husband speaks, you don't wait. You predict. You prepare your answer before he finishes. That is not listening." Her words were sharp but accurate. Research in communication science shows that most people spend more time preparing their response than truly absorbing what the other person is saying. Especially in a second language, your brain works overtime to translate, anticipate, and respond. Deep listening requires slowing down that internal process. And slowing down feels risky. What if I don't understand? I asked her. Then you ask, she replied simply. That simplicity frustrated me. Asking feels vulnerable. Saying I don't understand feels like admitting weakness. But vulnerability is the foundation of intimacy. Without it, relationships become polite performances. My mom saw something else too. She noticed how tired I was. Not physically, but mentally. Living in America meant constant language exposure, television, school meetings, grocery stores, phone calls. My brain rarely rested. Cognitive science explains that second language processing consumes more mental resources than native language use. This can lead to decision fatigue and emotional irritability. When you are mentally drained, patience decreases. Listening requires patience. So exhaustion quietly reduces your ability to connect. You are tired, my mom said gently. And when you are tired, you defend instead of receive. That sentence changed everything. I realized that I had been measuring my English progress only by how much I could say. How many words I knew. How fluent I sounded. I never measured how well I could listen without anxiety. Listening is not passive. It is an active skill. It requires attention, emotional regulation, and humility. In relationships, it requires love. So I asked my mom, how do I change? She smiled, almost amused that I wanted a technique. Start small, she said. Next time someone speaks to you, don't think about your answer. Just focus on understanding their feeling. Understanding feeling, not just content. That was new for me. When my husband said work was exhausting, I used to hear problem, solution needed. Now I tried to hear frustration, stress, maybe disappointment. This shift aligns with what psychologists call empathic listening, the practice of identifying the emotional layer beneath the words. Studies show that empathic listening increases relationship satisfaction and reduces conflict intensity. But beyond science, it simply feels human. My mom also reminded me of something else. You moved to America for growth, she said. Growth is uncomfortable. But discomfort is not danger. That distinction was powerful. My brain had been treating language mistakes like threats. But mistakes are not threats. They are information. They show you where you are stretching. Before she left the United States, we had one more deep conversation. I told her I was afraid that I had already damaged my marriage with my defensiveness. She looked at me with that calm confidence only mothers seem to have and said, "Love is stronger than misunderstanding. But only if you choose to listen." Choose. Listening is not automatic. It is a decision. That afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table in a small American home far from where I grew up, I understood something clearly for the first time. My English journey and my marriage journey were connected. If I improved one, I would improve the other. Because both required the same skill. Presence. And maybe my mom didn't come to America just to visit. Maybe she came to remind me who I was before fear became louder than love. The science of truly listening. Imagine your brain as a busy airport in the United States. Planes are landing, taking off, changing gates. Announcements are echoing everywhere. Now imagine trying to hear one soft voice in the middle of all that noise. That is what listening in a second language feels like. After my conversation with my mom, I became curious. Not just emotionally curious, but scientifically curious. Why was listening so hard for me? Why did I misunderstand my husband even when I knew most of the vocabulary? Why did I feel exhausted after simple conversations? So I started reading about the psychology of listening and second language acquisition. And what I discovered changed the way I approached English learning and my marriage. First, let's talk about the brain. When you listen in your native language, your brain processes sound patterns automatically. You don't consciously analyze grammar. You don't translate word by word. It flows. But when you listen in English as a second language, especially in a fast American environment, your brain activates multiple systems at once: sound recognition, vocabulary retrieval, grammar processing, and meaning interpretation. This increases cognitive load. Cognitive load simply means how much mental energy you are using at one time. When cognitive load is high, working memory becomes overloaded. And when working memory is overloaded, comprehension drops. That explains why I sometimes understood my husband perfectly in the morning but struggled at night. By evening, my brain was tired. Listening required more energy than I had left. There is also something called predictive processing. The brain constantly predicts what someone will say next. In your native language, these predictions are usually accurate. In a second language, predictions can be wrong. When you predict incorrectly, you may respond to a meaning that was never intended. That was exactly what I was doing in my marriage. I wasn't only hearing words. I was predicting emotional meaning based on fear. If my husband said, "We need to talk about the budget," my brain predicted criticism, even if his tone was calm. Another important concept is emotional regulation. When you feel anxious, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes active. This shifts resources away from higher-level thinking. In simple terms, anxiety reduces your ability to process complex language. So every time I felt insecure about my English, I was biologically making it harder to understand English. That realization was strangely comforting. I wasn't stupid. I was stressed. Research in communication psychology also highlights the difference between passive hearing and active listening. Hearing is automatic. Listening is intentional. Active listening involves eye contact, body orientation, asking clarifying questions, and reflecting back what you heard. These behaviors are simple, but powerful. I decided to test this in real life. One evening, when my husband began sharing a story about work, I consciously slowed myself down. I placed both feet on the floor. I relaxed my shoulders. I told myself internally, just listen. Don't prepare your answer yet. When he finished a sentence, instead of jumping in, I said, "So you felt frustrated because they changed the plan last minute?" That is called reflective listening, repeating the message in your own words to confirm understanding. He looked surprised. Then he said, "Yes. Exactly." That exactly felt like a small victory. Studies show that reflective listening increases mutual understanding and reduces defensiveness in conversations. It creates what psychologists call emotional safety, the feeling that you are seen and understood. I also applied science to my English practice. Instead of long, exhausting study sessions, I broke listening practice into shorter, focused blocks. Research in language learning suggests that spaced repetition and consistent exposure are more effective than long, irregular sessions. So I listened to short English stories daily. I repeated sentences aloud slowly. I shadowed simple dialogues. Not to sound perfect, but to train my ear. I paid attention to intonation. In American English, tone often carries emotional meaning. A rising tone can signal uncertainty. A flat tone may signal seriousness. Understanding tone improved my emotional comprehension more than memorizing vocabulary lists. I also learned to tolerate ambiguity. Linguists emphasize that you do not need to understand every word to understand the message. When I stopped chasing every single unknown word, my listening became more relaxed. Relaxation improved comprehension. It's almost ironic. The more desperately you try to understand everything, the less you actually understand. The more calmly you listen, the clearer things become. There is another concept that changed me: growth mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research shows that people who believe abilities can be developed respond better to challenges. Instead of saying, "I'm bad at listening," I started saying, "I'm training my listening skills." Language learning in the United States in 2026 is supported by countless resources, podcasts, YouTube English listening practice videos, real English story practice content like this. But tools are not enough. Mindset determines how you use them. Slow listening. Reflective listening. Emotional regulation. Short daily practice. Tolerating mistakes. These were not dramatic changes. But they were consistent. And something unexpected happened. As my listening improved, my marriage softened. As my anxiety decreased, my curiosity increased. As my brain felt safer, it processed language more efficiently. Science explained what my mom had intuitively known. Listening is not just about ears. It is about attention, emotion, and intention. When you understand how your brain works, you stop blaming yourself. You start training yourself. And when you train your listening with patience instead of pressure, English stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like a bridge. Learning English through my own story. One morning, instead of opening another grammar book, I opened my phone camera. No script. No perfect lighting. Just me, sitting at the kitchen table in my small American home, saying slowly, "Today I want to tell you about my first winter in the United States." My voice sounded different in English. Softer. More careful. But it was real. That was the day I stopped treating English like a school subject and started treating it like a life story. If you are learning English in the United States in 2026, you already know there are endless resources. Apps. Courses. Podcasts. YouTube English listening practice channels. Real English story practice videos. But here is what I discovered: information does not automatically create connection. Story does. When I began telling my own story out loud, slowly, clearly, imperfectly, something shifted in my brain. Instead of searching for impressive vocabulary, I searched for honest meaning. I felt cold, I said in the video. Not just outside. Inside too. Simple words. But powerful. From a language acquisition perspective, this makes sense. According to input and output theories in second language learning, meaningful communication strengthens retention. When language is connected to personal emotion, your brain encodes it more deeply. Emotion acts like glue for memory. When I memorized random sentences, I forgot them quickly. But when I described the day I cried in the supermarket parking lot, I never forgot the vocabulary for embarrassed, overwhelmed, or lonely. I began a daily ritual. Every afternoon, after finishing my responsibilities, I spent 15 minutes telling one small piece of my life story in English. Sometimes I recorded it. Sometimes I just spoke to the wall. The topic did not matter. What mattered was consistency. One day I described my first misunderstanding with my husband. Another day I talked about my fear during a parent-teacher meeting. Another day I explained how American small talk confused me. At first, I judged myself constantly. Your pronunciation is not clear. You are repeating simple words. This is not advanced enough. But then I remembered what I learned about cognitive load and emotional safety. If I criticize myself while speaking, my anxiety increases. And when anxiety increases, fluency decreases. So I made a rule, no self-interruption. If I forgot a word, I described it another way. If I made a grammar mistake, I kept going. Fluency before perfection. Interestingly, research in language fluency training supports this approach. Speaking without stopping improves automaticity, the brain's ability to retrieve language quickly. Over time, automaticity reduces hesitation and increases confidence. And confidence changes everything. Something unexpected happened inside my marriage too. Because when you practice telling your story clearly, you become better at sharing your feelings. Instead of saying, "You don't understand me," I started saying, "When you speak fast, I feel anxious because I'm afraid of misunderstanding." That sentence changed our dynamic. It was not an accusation. It was information. My husband responded differently too. He slowed down. He checked in. He asked, "Do you want me to repeat that?" Not in a frustrated tone, but in a supportive one. Storytelling also improved my listening. When you tell stories, you become aware of structure, beginning, conflict, resolution. You start recognizing patterns in other people's stories. When my husband described a stressful meeting, I could identify the emotional arc, tension, frustration, reflection. Instead of reacting too early, I waited for the resolution. In psychology, this relates to narrative competence, the ability to understand and organize experiences as stories. Narrative competence enhances empathy because you see events as part of a larger context, not isolated sentences. Another benefit surprised me. Recording myself allowed me to observe my tone. I noticed that when I felt insecure, my voice became quiet and rushed. When I felt confident, my speech slowed naturally. So I practiced intentional pacing. Slow sentences. Clear pauses. American English often values clarity and rhythm. Pausing is not weakness. It signals thoughtfulness. When I allowed myself to pause, my speech sounded more natural. I also began watching my own recordings like a student, but with kindness. I wrote down phrases I liked. I repeated them the next day. I noticed improvement week by week. Not dramatic, but steady. Consistency builds identity. Instead of saying, "I am bad at English," I started saying, "I am someone who practices English every day." That shift from fixed identity to active process aligns with growth mindset research. Identity follows behavior. Gradually, telling my story became more than language practice. It became healing. I realized that moving to America was not just a geographical change. It was an identity transformation. And language was the bridge between who I was and who I was becoming. If you feel stuck in your English listening and speaking journey, try this: tell your own story. Slowly. Honestly. No performance. No comparison. Describe your hardest day. Describe your proudest moment. Describe the sentence someone said that changed you. When language carries your truth, it becomes alive. And one day, as I finished recording a short story about my mom's visit, I listened back and noticed something subtle. I wasn't just speaking English. I was finally hearing myself. Small conversations, big changes. You don't rebuild a marriage with one dramatic speech. You rebuild it with small conversations in the kitchen, in the car, in the hallway before bed. Quiet moments. Ordinary words. Repeated differently. After I started practicing English through my own stories, something else changed naturally. I became braver in everyday conversations. Not braver in a loud way. Braver in a steady way. One Saturday morning, my husband and I were making breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Our child was still asleep. Normally, mornings were efficient. Pass the salt. Did you pay the bill? Functional communication. That day, I tried something new. Instead of waiting for him to lead the conversation, I said slowly, "Can I tell you something I've been thinking about?" He looked at me, curious. Of course. My heart beat faster. Even after years in the United States, initiating deeper conversations in English still felt vulnerable. But I continued. Sometimes when you speak fast, I feel nervous. Not because of you. Because I'm afraid I will misunderstand. I paused. I let the sentence sit in the air. In communication psychology, this is called using I statements. Instead of accusing, you speak too fast, you describe your internal experience. Research shows that I statements reduce defensiveness and increase empathy in couples. He didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He nodded. I didn't realize it made you nervous, he said. I can slow down. And you can always stop me. Such a simple exchange. But it felt like a bridge being repaired. That same week, I began applying my listening skills in even smaller moments. In the car, instead of scrolling through my phone at red lights, I asked, "What was the most interesting part of your day?" Then I truly listened. Not to respond quickly. Not to prove my English was good. Just to understand. Active listening involves micro-behaviors, eye contact, nodding, brief verbal confirmations like "I see," "That makes sense," "Tell me more." These signals show presence. In American culture, these subtle cues are especially important because direct emotional language is common. People expect engagement. When my husband noticed these changes, he responded with more openness. He shared details he used to keep short. He explained workplace dynamics more clearly. He laughed more during our conversations. And something beautiful happened. My English improved faster. Because real-life conversation provides unpredictable input. Unlike scripted lessons, real dialogue forces your brain to adapt in real time. This strengthens neural pathways associated with comprehension and response. Our child became part of this transformation too. One evening, during dinner, our child said, "Mom, you don't talk as much as Dad." The comment was innocent, but it touched a deep insecurity. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I smiled and said, "I'm practicing. I want to talk more." Then I asked, "What do you think I should talk about?" Children are honest teachers. "Tell stories," our child said. "You tell good stories." That night, I told a simple story about my first day driving in America. I described the wide highways, the confusing exits, the fear of missing a turn. I used basic vocabulary. Clear sentences. Everyone listened. Afterward, my husband said, "You should share stories more often." Small conversations became daily practice sessions. Not formal. Not scheduled. Organic. In the field of second language acquisition, experts emphasize the importance of meaningful interaction. Language develops through negotiation of meaning, asking for clarification, confirming understanding, rephrasing ideas. These natural repairs during conversation build fluency more effectively than isolated drills. I noticed that when I stopped trying to sound advanced, my speech became more fluid. I used simple words confidently. I feel overwhelmed. I was confused. I need help understanding. Clarity over complexity. Another change was my tolerance for silence. Before, if a conversation paused, I panicked internally. I felt responsible for filling the gap. But silence is not failure. It is processing time. In American communication styles, short pauses are normal. They do not mean rejection. So when my husband paused to think, I allowed it. When I needed a second to translate internally, I took it. Breathing slowly reduced cognitive load. My sentences became steadier. Even disagreements improved. One evening, we disagreed about finances. Instead of reacting defensively, I said, "Let me make sure I understand you." Then I summarized his concern. He corrected one detail gently. We clarified instead of escalating. That is the power of listening combined with speaking practice. Listening improved understanding. Speaking improved confidence. Together, they repaired connection. If you are learning English in the United States and feel isolated, start with small conversations. You don't need a public speech. You need one honest sentence at breakfast. One curious question in the car. One reflective response before bed. Language grows in daily life. Love grows in daily life too. And sometimes, the biggest transformation does not come from dramatic change. It comes from choosing, again and again, to say, "Tell me more. I'm here." The moment I truly heard him. There is a difference between listening politely and listening with your whole body. I didn't understand that difference until one ordinary Tuesday night in our living room in the United States. It wasn't a dramatic day. No shouting. No crisis. Just quiet tension that had been building for months. My husband sat on the couch, looking more tired than usual. I could see it in the way his shoulders leaned forward. He said, "Can we talk for a minute?" Before, that sentence would have triggered anxiety in me. My brain would start predicting problems. Budget issues. Parenting disagreements. Something I misunderstood again. But this time, I felt something different. Instead of preparing my defense, I took one slow breath. "Yes," I said. "I'm listening." He hesitated. Then he said something simple but heavy. "Sometimes I feel alone, even when we're in the same room." That sentence could have started an argument in the past. I could have responded with, "What do you mean?" "I'm always here." I could have listed everything I do for our family. I could have defended my effort. But I remembered what I had been practicing, reflective listening. So instead of reacting, I repeated slowly, "You feel alone, even when I'm here?" He nodded. His eyes softened. "Yes. Not because you don't care. But because sometimes it feels like you're somewhere else." Somewhere else. He wasn't talking about another country. He was talking about my mind. I realized that even when I physically sat next to him, part of my brain was busy translating, analyzing, worrying about mistakes. I was half present, half guarded. From a psychological perspective, this is called divided attention. When attention is split between internal anxiety and external conversation, emotional connection weakens. Your partner feels it, even if they cannot explain it. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say, "I'm trying my best." But I asked another question instead. "When do you feel that the most?" That question changed everything. He described evenings when he shared something important and I responded quickly with advice. He described moments when he tried to joke and I didn't react because I was still processing the words. He said, "I miss when we used to laugh without effort." His honesty hurt. But it was clean hurt. Not attacking. Not blaming. Just truth. I noticed something interesting inside myself. Instead of feeling shame, I felt clarity. Because for the first time, I wasn't listening through fear. I was listening through curiosity. Curiosity creates space. Research in relationship science shows that couples who engage in open-ended questioning during conflict are more likely to reach mutual understanding. Open-ended questions slow down reactive patterns and invite deeper explanation. So I said, "I think I've been scared of misunderstanding you. And when I'm scared, I rush. Or I hide." That was the most honest sentence I had spoken in months. He reached for my hand. "I don't need perfect English," he said. "I need you." That line could sound dramatic in a movie. But in our quiet living room, it felt grounding. In second language environments, identity shifts can affect intimacy. When you operate daily in a non-native language, part of your expressive self feels muted. If you do not consciously rebuild that expressive confidence, emotional distance can grow. That night, I decided to rebuild actively. I want to understand you better, I said. Even if it takes longer. So we tried something practical. He spoke a little slower. Not artificially slow. Just mindful. And when I didn't understand, I stopped apologizing excessively. I simply said, "Can you explain that part?" Removing shame from clarification changed the emotional tone immediately. There is strong evidence in communication studies that clarification requests, when done calmly, strengthen rather than weaken connection. They signal interest. As the conversation continued, I noticed something else. When I focused entirely on his facial expressions, his tone, his pauses, I understood more than I expected. Meaning lives beyond vocabulary. And then something beautiful happened. He told a small joke about a misunderstanding at work. I caught it instantly. I laughed naturally. Not delayed. Not forced. He looked surprised. Then he laughed too. That laughter felt like a door reopening. In that moment, I truly heard him. Not perfectly. Not academically. But emotionally. Hearing someone is not about decoding every word. It is about receiving their experience without turning it into a personal threat. For months, I had been treating English conversations like exams. That night, I treated our conversation like a bridge. If you are learning English in the United States and struggling in your relationships, ask yourself gently, are you listening to respond, or listening to understand? There is a subtle but powerful shift between those two. Listening to respond is fast. Defensive. Ego-protecting. Listening to understand is slower. Curious. Brave. That Tuesday night did not solve every problem. But it changed our direction. Because once you truly hear someone say, "I feel alone," and you don't argue, you connect. And connection, more than vocabulary, is what keeps love alive. The day I finally listened. For months after my daughter said, "You don't listen," I kept replaying those words in my head. Not because they were loud. But because they were quiet. The kind of quiet truth that sits inside you long after the argument ends. If you're watching this Real English Story practice video to improve your English listening skills, I want you to pause for a second. This story is not only about learning English in America. It's about emotional intelligence, parenting, communication in marriage, and the moment you realize that maybe you've been hearing words, but not truly listening. And that realization can change everything. A few weeks after our argument, my daughter came home from school quieter than usual. Normally she would throw her backpack on the couch and talk about her friends, her teacher, or something funny that happened during lunch. But that day, she went straight to her room. Old me would have shouted from the kitchen, "How was school?" She would have said, "Fine." And that would have been the end of it. But I remembered her words. "You don't listen." So I did something different. I walked to her room. I knocked softly. I sat on the floor instead of standing over her. And I said, "I have time. Tell me what happened." She didn't answer right away. And this is important. especially for anyone learning American English conversation skills. Silence is uncomfortable. We rush to fill it. We interrupt. We fix. We give advice. But listening requires patience. After a long pause, she said, "I didn't get picked for the group project." I almost responded with logic. "That's okay. It's not a big deal. You're smart. Next time will be better." But I stopped myself. Instead, I asked, "Did that hurt?" Her eyes filled with tears. Yes. That was it. That was the moment. She didn't need solutions. She needed validation. As parents, and honestly, as partners in marriage, we often confuse problem-solving with listening. We think love means fixing. But real communication means understanding first. If you're practicing English through this emotional story, notice the difference between these phrases. It's not a big deal. That sounds really hard. One dismisses. One connects. That day, I chose connection. Later that night, something else happened. My husband and I were sitting at the kitchen table. Usually, our conversations had become short and practical: bills, schedules, chores. Marriage after years together can quietly turn into logistics instead of intimacy. I told him what happened with our daughter. He listened. And then he said something that surprised me. "She says you don't listen. But sometimes, you don't listen to me either." That hurt. But instead of defending myself, I asked, "When?" He hesitated. "Last month. When I told you I was stressed at work. You said I was overreacting." I remembered. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was encouraging him to stay strong. But strength without empathy feels cold. Learning English in the United States taught me vocabulary. Living in a family taught me humility. There is a big difference between understanding grammar and understanding people. If you're watching this to improve English listening practice, here's something powerful. Listening is not passive. It's active. It requires intention, eye contact, curiosity, emotional awareness. Over the next few weeks, I made small changes. When my daughter talked, I put my phone away. When my husband spoke, I asked follow-up questions. When I felt defensive, I paused before answering. And something slowly shifted. Our home felt softer. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Just safer. One evening, my daughter came into the kitchen and started telling me about a boy in her class who had moved from another country and was struggling with English. "He's quiet," she said. "People think he's weird." I asked, "What do you think?" She shrugged. "I think he's just scared." I felt a lump in my throat. Because that was me years ago, learning English in America, afraid to speak, afraid to make mistakes, afraid people wouldn't understand me. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. When we learn to listen deeply at home, we become more compassionate outside. Listening is a skill that improves relationships, parenting, marriage, and even language learning. If you want to speak English fluently, you must learn to listen carefully. If you want a strong marriage, you must listen without preparing your defense. If you want your child to trust you, you must listen without minimizing their feelings. Months after that first argument, my daughter said something different. We were driving home from the grocery store, and she was telling me a long story about her friend Drama. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I just listened. When she finished, she smiled and said, "Thanks for listening." It was simple. But it felt like winning something invisible. Not because I became a perfect parent. Not because I fixed everything. But because I changed. If you're feeling discouraged, in parenting, in marriage, in learning English, or even in life, maybe the answer isn't to try harder. Maybe it's to listen deeper. Listen to your child. Listen to your partner. Listen to yourself. Sometimes the breakthrough you're searching for isn't louder motivation. It's quieter attention. And if this story helped you practice English listening while also reflecting on your own life, then this real English story practice journey has done its job. Because language is not just about words. It's about connection. And connection begins the moment we truly hear each other. The conversation that almost didn't happen. There was a night I almost gave up. Not on my marriage. Not on my daughter. But on myself. If you've ever tried to improve your English speaking skills while managing family, work, and emotional exhaustion, you know that feeling. The quiet voice that says, "This is too much. You're not good enough. Just stop trying." That night, I sat in the dark living room after everyone went to bed. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. I kept thinking about how hard it is to live in America when English is not your first language. Every conversation feels like a test. Every misunderstanding feels personal. Every argument feels heavier because you're translating emotions in your head before you can express them. And when my daughter once said, "You don't listen," it triggered something deeper. What if she was right? What if I was so busy surviving that I forgot how to connect? This real English story practice episode isn't just about listening skills in English. It's about emotional listening, the kind that saves relationships before they quietly collapse. The next morning, I almost avoided a difficult conversation. My husband had been distant. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just distant. In marriage, distance is more dangerous than conflict. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to stay busy. I wanted to focus on improving my English, growing our life, moving forward. But growth doesn't happen in avoidance. So I asked him to sit with me at the kitchen table. Not to argue. Not to blame. But to listen. I said, "I feel like we're drifting. And I don't want that." He didn't answer immediately. And this is something important for anyone practicing English conversation in real life. Silence is not rejection. Silence can be processing. Finally, he said, "I feel like you're always stressed. Like you're fighting something invisible. And I don't know how to help." That surprised me. Because I thought I was hiding it well. But stress leaks. especially in a family. I told him the truth. I'm tired of feeling behind. Behind in language. Behind in confidence. Behind in understanding everything around me. Living in the United States as an immigrant parent means you're constantly adapting. School systems, social expectations, workplace communication, it never stops. And sometimes that pressure turns into defensiveness. When my daughter spoke quickly in American slang, I felt insecure. When my husband corrected my pronunciation, I felt small. When I didn't understand something, I felt embarrassed. So instead of saying, I feel insecure, I reacted with impatience. That's what unspoken fear looks like. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget. You don't have to be perfect here. You just have to be present. Present. Not fluent. Not flawless. Present. If you're watching this to improve English listening practice, notice the emotional vocabulary in this story. Insecure. Defensive. Overwhelmed. Present. Distant. Connected. These words are not just language tools. They are relationship tools. That conversation lasted almost 2 hours. We didn't solve everything. But we understood more. And understanding creates safety. A few days later, my daughter asked me for help with her homework. It was a reading assignment. Normally, I would feel nervous reading aloud in English. I worried about pronunciation mistakes or reading too slowly. But I remembered something important. Children don't need perfect parents. They need available parents. So we read together. When I stumbled over a word, she corrected me gently. We laughed. It wasn't embarrassing. It was human. And for the first time, I realized something powerful about learning English as an adult in America. Vulnerability builds stronger bonds than perfection. If you're trying to improve English speaking skills, stop waiting to feel confident before you speak. Confidence grows after action, not before it. Later that week, something unexpected happened. My daughter came home and said, "Mom, I told that new student I'd sit with him at lunch." "The quiet one?" I asked. She nodded. "He just needs someone to listen." That hit me deeply. Because the lesson had come full circle. When we feel heard at home, we learn to hear others in the world. Listening is contagious. In parenting, listening builds trust. In marriage, listening builds intimacy. In language learning, listening builds fluency. But here's the truth most people don't talk about. Listening also builds self-respect. When I stopped criticizing myself for every grammar mistake, I felt calmer. When I stopped comparing my English to native speakers, I felt freer. Comparison creates distance. Compassion creates progress. If you're feeling like quitting, whether it's English learning, your relationship, or your own self-improvement journey, pause. Ask yourself, am I exhausted because I'm failing? Or am I exhausted because I'm trying to be perfect? Perfection isolates. Presence connects. That night in the dark living room, I almost chose isolation. Instead, I chose conversation. And conversation changed everything. Not overnight. Not magically. But gradually. Today, our home isn't louder. It's softer. There's more eye contact. More pauses. More understanding. My daughter doesn't say, "You don't listen," anymore. Sometimes she even says, "You really get me." And that matters more than perfect grammar ever will. If this real English story practice helped you improve your English listening skills while reflecting on marriage communication, parenting growth, or emotional intelligence, then remember this. Fluency in language is powerful. But fluency in empathy is transformational. Keep practicing English. Keep showing up in your relationships. And most importantly, keep listening. Because sometimes, the conversation that almost didn't happen is the one that saves everything. The moment I stopped trying to win. There was a time in my marriage when every conversation felt like a quiet competition. Who was more tired? Who sacrificed more? Who was right? Maybe you felt that too. If you're learning English in the United States while building a family, the pressure can turn simple discussions into emotional battles. You don't just argue about dishes or schedules, you argue about identity, stress, belonging, and unspoken fears. And here's the dangerous part. Sometimes we're not trying to understand. We're trying to win. This Real English Story Practice episode is about the moment I realized winning arguments was slowly costing me connection. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. My husband came home later than usual. I had already helped our daughter with homework, cooked dinner, cleaned the kitchen, and answered emails in broken English that took twice as long as they should have. I was exhausted. When he walked in, I didn't say hello. I said, "Must be nice to stay late at work and avoid everything here." It was sharp. Defensive. Loaded. He froze. "I wasn't avoiding anything," he replied. "I told you I had a deadline." And there it was, the shift from conversation to confrontation. If you're practicing English listening skills, notice the tone difference between these statements. I missed you. It was a hard day. Must be nice to avoid everything. Same feeling. Different delivery. One invites connection. The other invites defense. We went back and forth for almost 20 minutes. Each sentence became proof that the other person wasn't understanding enough, appreciating enough, trying enough. Finally, he said something simple. Are we trying to solve something, or are we trying to win? That question stopped me. Because I knew the answer. I was trying to win. Not because I wanted to hurt him. But because when you feel unseen, you fight to be acknowledged. Living in America as a non-native English speaker sometimes made me feel small. At school meetings, I felt insecure. At social gatherings, I overthought every sentence. At work, I worried about my accent. So at home, I wanted control. Control feels like strength when everything else feels unstable. But control is not connection. That night, instead of continuing the argument, I did something uncomfortable. I said, I don't want to win. I want to feel supported. There was a long pause. Then he said, then tell me what support looks like. That question changed the direction of our marriage. Because many couples say, you don't support me, but they never define what support actually means. For me, support wasn't grand gestures. It was small things. Asking about my day, and waiting for the real answer. Encouraging my English speaking practice without correcting every mistake. Sitting next to me when I felt overwhelmed instead of offering quick solutions. Support is presence, not performance. If you're using this real English story practice to improve your English fluency, pay attention to emotional phrases like, I feel overwhelmed. I need reassurance. That hurt more than I expected. Can we try again? These are real-life conversation tools. They build intimacy. A few days after that argument, something surprising happened. I made a mistake in front of my daughter's teacher during a school conference. I misunderstood a question and answered something completely unrelated. I felt embarrassed immediately. Old me would have stayed quiet for the rest of the meeting. But I took a breath and said, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Can you repeat that? The teacher smiled kindly and repeated it. Nothing dramatic happened. The world didn't collapse. And in that small moment, I learned something powerful about both English listening practice and relationships. Clarity is more important than pride. When you pretend to understand, confusion grows. When you admit you need clarification, connection grows. That same principle applied at home. Later that week, my daughter asked, why do you and Dad argue sometimes? I could have given a simple answer. Because adults disagree. But I chose honesty. Sometimes we forget to listen. And sometimes we try to win instead of understand. She thought for a moment and said, that happens at school too. Of course it does. Human behavior doesn't change with age. Whether in parenting, marriage, or learning English in America, the real struggle isn't vocabulary. It's vulnerability. The moment I stopped trying to win arguments, our home felt lighter. Not because we stopped disagreeing, but because disagreements stopped feeling like threats. If you're watching this and feeling tired of fighting, tired of misunderstanding, tired of feeling unheard, ask yourself, am I protecting my ego? Or am I protecting the relationship? Ego says, prove your point. Love says, preserve the connection. In language learning, ego says, don't make mistakes. Growth says, make them anyway. There is freedom in letting go of being right. There is power in saying, help me understand. And there is peace in realizing that connection matters more than control. Today, when my husband and I disagree, we still feel frustration sometimes. But we also recognize the pattern faster. One of us will say, are we solving or winning? And just like that, the tone shifts. If this real English story practice episode helped you improve your English listening skills while reflecting on marriage communication, parenting growth, and emotional intelligence, then remember this. Fluency in English is built through practice. Fluency in love is built through humility. Stop trying to win every sentence. Start trying to understand every heart. Because in the end, the strongest relationships aren't the ones where someone wins. They're the ones where no one has to lose. What if the biggest reason your English isn't improving is the same reason your relationships feel stuck? Not grammar. Not vocabulary. Not pronunciation. But attention. Throughout this Real English Story Practice series, we didn't just practice English listening skills. We practiced something deeper: emotional awareness, marriage communication, parenting connection, and the courage to slow down long enough to truly hear the people we love. And maybe, to hear ourselves. If you've followed this story from the beginning, you've seen something subtle but powerful. The problem was never English. The problem was disconnection. When my daughter said, "You don't listen," it wasn't just a sentence. It was a mirror. When my husband asked, "Are we solving or winning?" it wasn't just a question. It was an invitation. And when I finally chose presence over perfection, something changed, not instantly, not dramatically, but permanently. So before this video ends, I want to ask you something personal. Who in your life needs you to listen differently? Your child? Your partner? Yourself? Because improving your English speaking skills in 2026 is not just about sounding fluent in America. It's about expressing emotion clearly. It's about understanding tone. It's about responding instead of reacting. Language is power. But listening is transformation. If this story helped you practice English naturally, improve your English listening comprehension, and reflect on real-life communication skills in marriage and parenting, then this is only the beginning. In the next Real English Story Practice episode, we're going deeper. What happens when your child stops talking altogether? What happens when silence replaces conflict? And how do you reconnect when distance feels permanent? That story is more uncomfortable, more honest, and maybe more necessary. So if you don't want to miss it, subscribe to the channel for more Real English Story Practice designed to help you improve English fluency through emotional storytelling. Like this video if it made you think differently about communication. Comment below. Have you ever realized you weren't truly listening? What changed for you? Your voice matters here. Your experience matters. And if you're quietly struggling with English learning, with marriage, with parenting, or just with feeling understood, you are not alone. Keep practicing. Keep showing up. Keep listening. Because sometimes the breakthrough you're waiting for is hiding inside a conversation you haven't had yet. I'll see you in the next story.